Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'd like to invite you all to please take your seats and please cease your conversations for the moment. My name is Jennifer Gordon, and I'm the director of the Atlantic Council's Nuclear Energy Policy Initiative. And we're here at the GDA Connect space in the Green Zone at COP28. And we're going to be talking about nuclear energy and U.S. leadership in the world on nuclear energy, and also, of course, the just transition. So a number of different topics. And I am so delighted to introduce this panel's speakers. The Honorable Jeff Duncan from South Carolina, the Honorable Diana DeGette from Colorado, and the Honorable Brandon Williams from New York. And also, before we begin, I just want to say a very quick thank you to the Conservative Climate Foundation and also to Cress Forum and especially to Chrissy Harbin. Thank you for helping us pull such an incredible group of speakers together, and we'll also be, thank you. And we'll be all together for, I think, the next 3 hours of programming, so everyone here is in for quite a treat. So, Congressman Duncan, I would like to start with you. You are right now working on what's been called the biggest reform in nuclear power regulation legislation in decades. So tell us a little bit about your work on that, please.
Well, Jennifer, thanks, and thanks for everyone being here and having such a strong interest in nuclear. You know, it's really exciting times as we think about the future of power generation across the globe and to see the expansion and propagation of nuclear power. So one thing we have to do as policymakers is look at what might be the impediments of expansion of nuclear in the United States and how we can regain our dominance in the realm of technology and nuclear. So working with the DOE, and I see Assistant Secretary Huff here, we have great conversations with all the stakeholders. And so we just passed this past week out of committee the Atomic Energy Advancement Act, which is really about 12 bills put together in one big broad package, really addressing things like how do we make reforms at the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to get them into the 21st century so that they can help foster nuclear development and not be an impediment to it. And so the regulatory environment is really tough. Diana has had a portion of it on workforce development at the NRC to make sure that those people have the training and the expertise necessary to expedite the licensing, relicensing of existing fleet. And so how do we build more nuclear in this country? You know, we look at advanced nuclear, small modular reactors, micro reactors, but also traditional light water reactors and those designs that are proven, 60-year technology that works. How do we help do that? And there's a financing structure that has to be in place. We've got to go back and look at Price-Anderson and some liability protection. So we still have some work to do, but this is a great package. We hope to get to the floor, conference with the Senate, and actually get the President to sign something that's monumental for this nation.
Congressman Duncan, thank you so much for that response. And Congresswoman DeGette, I want to go to you because, as I mentioned, I was just recently in Denver and talking about the role of the Mountain West in the energy transition, which I think is so crucial. And it's also great to hear that you played a role in this legislation on the workforce development piece. So tell us a little bit about your work and priorities.
Well, again, I'll add my thanks for hosting us here today. And I will also say to you, probably 10 years ago, you wouldn't have had a Democrat like me sitting on this stage talking about nuclear energy. So I'm really happy to be here. What has happened, and the genesis of the paradigm shift for Democrats is we realize that we have to get to the climate goal of 0% by 2050. What this means for most of us is that it's going to be an all of the above strategy. That includes nuclear energy. And there are so many advances right now with nuclear technology that it's important. And one of the reasons I was really happy to team up with Chairman Duncan on this is because if we're really going to be serious about making nuclear energy a part of this mix, then we have to be able to number one, look at these new technologies, the small reactors and other things. But number two, we also have to have the personnel to do it. We have to have the ability to really make this a reality, not just something people talk about. So I was happy to join up with the chairman to do this. And what was really striking to me, I've been on the, now don't hold this against me, I've been on the Energy and Commerce Committee for 27 years. And I've never seen a bill like this pass with the majority it did. Only 2 people voted against this bill going through Energy and Commerce. So we're hoping to get it to the floor within the coming weeks. We will get it to the floor within the coming weeks. And then we have, believe it or not, there's a good bipartisan coalition in the Senate who is working on a companion bill. I bet you hardly anybody in our committee anymore, except for me, has been on a conference committee, but we actually think we might be able to get that done and get it to the president's desk. I'm just going to give one more caveat, which I always do when we talk about nuclear energy, because we're all giddy about the prospects, but something lurking in the shadows is still, what do we do with the nuclear waste and how do we dispose of it or recycle it or whatever we're going to do. So I do think that we need, and the chairman and I have talked about this, we need to continue to look at it both from a technical perspective but also a political perspective.
Can I just add to that? Nuclear waste is always going to be a factor. And I want to have a hearing on reprocessing and what we do with commercial waste. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if it's reused over and over, eventually there's going to be some waste that we're going to have to deal with. We also have defense waste, so having a repository of some sort is in the future for the nation. So looking at reprocessing as a fuel source, a domestic supply chain for enriched uranium, and possibly recycled and reused waste as fuel. I don't call it waste anymore. I call it a national asset because it's sitting there that can be turned into fuel.
Well, as we say, it's only waste if you waste it, right?
That's right.
So, Congressman Williams, I'd like to go to you because, of course, we know that your background is as a Navy nuke. And so we've talked a lot this week about the role of nuclear energy in climate. But I think there's also an aspect of nuclear energy that's crucial in national security. So talk to us a little bit about the intersection between nuclear energy and national security. And how do you see the United States engaging in the world and regaining the mantle of global leadership?
Well, that's quite a broad topic, and I will say that I've been in Congress for also 27 fortnights. That's about 54 weeks, so I'm brand new to Congress. I have thousands of hours supervising the operation of nuclear power plants. I qualified on 2 different reactor designs. When it comes to national security, energy security is national security, and the people of the United States elect us for a number of reasons, but one of which is to keep the lights on. And the way you keep the lights on is having a very reliable, resilient base load. Those are different, but it's there's a new dynamic, of course, that it has to be responsible, and by that I mean climate responsible, and it also has to be affordable. I think electric prices in the United States are up like 62% across the board, and so there is now this awareness that what we're doing is not working, and we think nuclear is the answer. But when it comes to national security, keeping the lights on is critical, but also our supply chain is critical. Right now, we're relying on critical minerals from some of our adversaries, where we're leaning on countries like China to build solar panels and turbine blades. And even though there's been a move to try to, bring that to the United States, that kind of manufacturing, so much of the critical minerals actually are not available in the United States. So they're still in that bottleneck in that supply chain. That's not sustainable. That does not work for us. Anyway, there's a number of other aspects to it, but having our own domestic mining, milling, enrichment, and the supply chain of materials that are unique, to the nuclear industry, particularly around metallurgy and other technologies, is absolutely critical. So I think they go hand in hand, not just because it's energy, but because it's nuclear energy. And it's time to restore American dominance there.
So I'd like to pick up on something that Congresswoman DeGette mentioned a few moments ago and maybe open it to the three of you, to anyone who would like to answer. You mentioned that here we are with this very bipartisan panel on nuclear energy. And while we know that politics in the United States have been perhaps a little bit on the contentious side over the last few years, it seems just a little. It does seem like nuclear energy is one issue where both sides seem to generally agree. So, Congressman Duncan, could you maybe comment on that a little bit?
Well, I'm glad it was a bipartisan bill that we got out, working with the ranking member here to make sure we get a bill that, as she said, there were only 2 no votes in the full committee, is important. And it has been a little contentious in Congress, but we're excited about what we might be able to get to the floor, might get a floor vote, get to conference with the Senate, and actually get something monumental to the President's desk that really addresses all the things that we need to address.
I will say, not to be the skunk at the picnic, but in fact, in the Inflation Reduction Act and the Build Back Better Act, we had tremendous initiatives to begin to bring a lot of the manufacture of solar and wind equipment, and also to strengthen up our alliances on the critical minerals and the other substances that we're going to need to get a clean energy, domestic energy supply. And I myself wish that had been more bipartisan, but however, now that we've passed it, now that that money is going out, and also now that we're working, we just had a meeting with our delegation, with the Australian delegation, talking about some of the critical minerals and the partnerships that we have this morning. And so I think most of us understand that this isn't that 0% by 2050 is existential. And so we really want to work together in a bipartisan way. That's something else with the voice of experience in Congress. I can say it's extraordinary. I'm saying it's extraordinary that the Democrats are talking about nuclear energy. It's also extraordinary to me that the Republicans are on the same page about reducing emissions, really tackling this issue of climate in a bipartisan way. And the last thing I'll say, none of us ran for Congress. None of the three of us, or most all of our colleagues in Congress, ran just to throw bombs. We really ran for Congress so that we could try to solve solutions. And as we look towards a clean energy solution, it's obvious to us that nuclear energy is a key component of that.
It was interesting. At one of our nuclear hearings, Dinah leaned over to me. She sits beside me on the dais, and she said, when I came to Congress, no Democrats would talk about nuclear, and here I am embracing it. And that's really how far it's come. They see that nuclear is the only way we're going to get to the carbon emission goals. There is no energy future without nuclear energy being a big part of that. And we had a meeting with Secretary Kerry just a little while ago, and he said his words were 1/3 increase in nuclear. They understand that if we're going to reach our climate goals, that's got to be a part of it. It's emissions-free and it's stable baseload generation.
And on the same page, none of the Democrats would talk about nuclear energy. I was the one who sat through a lot of those hearings where my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talked about how climate change is not real. So now we've got the chairman of the Energy Committee talking about our climate goals. So we come a long way together. People don't think that members of Congress really work together like that because all they see is the press. But in fact, there's a lot of that kind of bipartisan work going on.
The United States needs 200 gigawatts of new generation capacity. And it's absolutely critical that this be, like I said, reliable, resilient, affordable, and responsible. And nuclear has to be, I think, a huge part of that. We have an aging nuclear fleet. We've only commissioned one new power plant in the last 35 years. And but the things about energy density, the age of the asset, nuclear power plants last 80 years approximately. It's a fantastic base load, almost zero emissions if you discount the concrete that goes into making it. So I think there's just growing awareness. One of the big issues around nuclear, of course, is education and getting around the fear, and that's a lot of what I try to do. I'm not afraid of nuclear power. I wouldn't. I have lived 80 days at a time. From here to that wall, from a nuclear power plant on a submarine. So I think a lot of it has to do with education, and I think the American public is now ready for a next wave. That to me is the biggest thing, and that's what you're hearing expressed.
So here we are at COP28, and at the Atlantic Council, we've taken to calling this COP the nuclear COP, because it seems like we've made so many strides on nuclear energy just in the last week. And I'd like to hear from each of you, what's your experience been like at this COP? Have you been to COP before? How are you engaging with your international counterparts, and how are you engaging on nuclear energy?
Yeah, so this is my first COP, and I'm glad nuclear is a part of it. We ought to have a round of applause for nuclear being a part of our energy and climate goals. To sit down with Secretary Kerry and actually hear him say that they want to increase nuclear power generation by 1/3 was monumental for me to hear that come out of his mouth. And then to meet with our partners around the globe. And we met with Australia, as she said earlier. I'm meeting later with the Czech Republic. Hope to meet with Poland. Also going to meet with the Canadians about what they're doing in advanced nuclear reactors, whether that's SMRs and just the propagation of SMRs around the world, and the interest that SMRs are garnering around the world is exciting times. And once we get a proven design, once we get the DOE and NRC to sign off on them, I really see a great way to not only advance the propagation of nuclear SMRs across the United States, but also export that to other countries. Eastern Europe has really come to a conclusion that they need to be self-sufficient and reliant on themselves for their energy. They can't rely on Russia and Russian gas. And so when they came to that reality, where did they look to? They looked to nuclear as a way to meet their energy needs.
Congressman Duncan, thank you so much.
I've been to COP before, and I will say that I do find more of a discussion of nuclear at this particular event. One of the hats that I wear in Congress, I'm the co-chair of the Japan Study Group, and I've been to we went last spring in a congressional delegation to the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, and that was actually the second time I had been there. I went right after the catastrophe, but it's been fascinating to talk to our colleagues in Japan about their experience with nuclear power. Most of you know, Japan has no domestic source of power. They have no gas, they have no natural gas, they have no petroleum, and so they were heavily reliant on nuclear power before the tsunami and the catastrophe. Then, because of public opinion, they shut down all of their nuclear facilities. They were forced to then go to imported coal, which is not, in case you didn't know, it's not a clean fuel. So now what Japan is grappling with is how do they begin, and they have reopened some of their nuclear plants now, but they're thinking about what is their energy mix look going forward, because they're committed, just like we are, to the climate goals. And this is true around the world in many countries, is they're trying to grapple with the juxtaposition of public opinion and the reality that they're going to need to have a clean energy source. So I think this is a really good opportunity at COP28 for nations around the world to talk about what this looks like. And I think one place where they can look to is what the Nordic countries have done, because Mr. Chairman, I'd suggest we can have a delegation there. I was in Sweden and France some years ago on a delegation looking at both reprocessing of fuel and also storage, and the way those countries deal with public opinion, to your point, the way those countries deal with public opinion is a much more open and public discussion.
This is my first time to a COP summit, and it's very exciting. What I find interesting is the discussion around, I think people on my side of the aisle, I'm a Republican, really have had their head in the sand on climate for a long time. And you now see folks on my side of the aisle really coming out and engaging, and this is a great place to do that. And so as I listened to Secretary Kerry earlier today, or the Australians, or many different perspectives, to me it's very helpful to get the more complete picture. But the United States has to make smart investment decisions. These are not things that we can change tomorrow. These are decisions that we're going to live with for a very long time. And so to be part of those deliberative processes, that's what Jeff's leading, I think is absolutely critical that we're here and engaged. It's actually a fantastic place to do it. I've learned a lot.
This is the biggest bipartisan delegation the Congress has ever sent to COP. So
Thank you for that well-deserved round of applause. We're nearly out of time, but I do want to go to each of you again one more time quickly and ask you, what's next? What should we be looking to achieve by next COP, next year? And what does the next year look like for you?
Well, I come from South Carolina, and we had 2 new nuclear reactors being built, which that project failed for financial reasons primarily. And then across the river, we see what happened at Plant Vogtle with 2 new reactors built there, with 3 and 4 coming online very quickly soon. So we have to look at, if we're going to move the nation forward nuclear, what are some of the impediments? I think the financing structure of that, trying to get investors to really put up the money for it. Economies of scale will kick in eventually on SMRs that will help lower the cost of that going forward, but it's a very expensive endeavor on the front end. So looking at some sort of insurance liability backstop from the government for those projects, and just trying to get the manpower, people that are trained in nuclear physics, or looking at workforce development, not at NRC, but workforce development in general with the trade skills that are necessary to operate and build and whatnot with nuclear power is very important. So I think Congress has got to look at those 2 things, the financing structure backstops, and also how do we incentivize a workforce to be ready for the nuclear renaissance that I believe we're experiencing.
Well, in case you haven't noticed, next year is an election year in the U.S. And so some would argue it started already, but I think that you can really, if we really can pass legislation, broad legislation like the one that the chairman and I are co-sponsoring, I think that will be a big step forward to setting the steps in place for being able to do these expansions. So I would hope you could look for that early. I mean, you know, we have a saying in the U.S. House of Representatives, which is, these guys might be my opponents, but the Senate is the enemy. That's our phrase that we say. But what we mean by that is, you know, we can actually pass a bill quite quickly through the House, but then we have to go to the Senate. And so even though they've got a bill, we're really hoping that we can make quick progress in the first few months of the session to get it signed into law.
So when you think about what's next, I really come back to commercialization. We've studied a lot of things. Department of Energy has done a great job of doing the science and design of advanced nuclear designs. But it's time to get it into the marketplace. Federal government has to be a partner for that. It always has been, by the way, you know, particularly in the energy market, but in many other markets. So kind of like Jeff described, I always use the project finance framework that I learned at business school to really talk about the whole structure, not just the regulatory structure, but the ownership, the incentives, the offtake agreements, the supply agreements, and the supply chain, the finance structure. I did structured finance at Citibank for a couple years. So this is a big picture that we have to solve in small parts, and I think you're seeing, you know, Jeff accomplish that in his committee. But you know, I always tell him, you know, I'm from Washington. I'm here to help. To me, the pressure really is, and again, I can say things, I'll be brief here, I can say things maybe that others can't. I think we're making, the United States is making bad investment decisions, over-investing in renewables. John Kerry just said that 95% of new power gen in the U.S. is from renewables. I'm not sure if that's, you know, don't doubt him, but that seems like a lot. And if it was up to me, I would redirect massive amounts of what's in the IRA and IIJA into commercializing nuclear on a very large scale. And I've actually written a paper to support that argument. It's not about politics or policy. This is about energy security for the United States. It's about having affordable energy for working Americans. Everyone knows that energy security is national security, and everyone knows that it's an absolute key link in the success of your economy. And so we have to make good energy infrastructure investment decisions right now. I don't think we're doing that, and I think that nuclear is the most important investment that we can make. We have to go all in. I think innovation is critical. What we do in our DOE labs that I have oversight over is absolutely amazing, and we need to do more of that. And then we need to support the things that already work, right? That's existing hydro, existing nuclear, and natural gas. And those are the investments, in my opinion, that we should be making. Not to be too direct.
We love being direct around here. Unfortunately, though, that is all the time that we have. So please, everyone, join me in thanking our speakers, and please sit tight. We have another panel coming up.